Now, Ann Tweedy is going to introduce this year's Founders Day program.
So we are so proud to present the 2022 Arthur F. Kinney Conch Shell Award to the family of Dudley Bridges Sr. Dudley was born in Springfield, Mass. And moved to Amherst in 1948 after serving in the U.S. Army in World War II. In Amherst, he was employed by UMass as the Director of Building Operations, and he ultimately became the Director of Building Services. His civic engagement in the town includes being a co-founder of Amherst A Better Chance. ABC is a national residential high school program that prepares students from underserved school districts for higher education and future leadership roles. Dudley Bridges also got the West Side Historic District along Snell Street listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was during Dudley's time as a trustee with our own Amherst Historical Society that he started the process of getting the 5 Civil War tablets, once housed in the basement of Town Hall, properly displayed. Dudley's family includes Christopher and Charles Thompson, members of the regiment that braved capture and worse to arrive in Texas in 1865 to let people know that the Civil War and slavery had ended. With us today, accepting this award, is Deborah Bridges, Dudley's daughter, and Anika Lopes, Dudley's granddaughter. William Harris, president and CEO of Space Center Houston, is Dudley's nephew, and Edith Roberts Harris is the sister-in-law of Dudley and the daughter of Gil Roberts. We thank you so much for your family's ongoing contributions to Amherst.
Thank you. I would like to thank the Amherst Historical Society for honoring my grandfather, Dudley Bridges, for his efforts to daylight the Civil War tablets and find permanent home for them, so the significance that they represent can be learned, revisited, and celebrated as part of the very fabric of Amherst and beyond. They represent unmatched courage and sacrifice that led to my sitting here before you all today with my family as free human beings. My grandfather was a humble giant. His good deeds were done in silence. He strove for results that honored Amherst history and uplifted future generations. He gave second chances to those who no one else would. And he preferred his recognition to be visible through the success of those that he helped and the causes he supported, and in this case, initiated. He took pride in the fact that our ancestors are represented on these tablets and was committed to sharing these stories, which we will continue to do one story at a time and one life-changing gift at a time through a nonprofit being created in their name called Ancestral Bridges. I would also like to thank the Civil War Tablet Committee that this recognition and these efforts would not be possible without. And lastly, I would also like to thank Town Manager Paul Bockelman, who came in at a final hour and helped boo these tablets so they could serve as the nucleus for last year's Juneteenth celebrations. And with that, we'd like to share this with you. Thank you very much. And I'd like to hand it over to cousin William Harris. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anika, and thank you, Debbie. And I'm so humbled and honored to join all of you today. And Uncle Dudley would be so mad about getting this public recognition, but in his heart of hearts, he would absolutely be thrilled because, as Anika described, he was the silent giant. He really believed that action spoke louder than words. And he was very committed to the community. He was committed to Amherst, and he was always committed to doing the right thing. And he would give people more than 2 chances. He would give people 3 chances and 4 chances because in his heart of heart, he believed that everyone was good and could have a positive impact in the lives of others. Again, we're so thrilled by this recognition. Our family has a long history in Amherst. And I think, as many of you know, because you participated in the events of the inaugural Juneteenth celebration last year, while we held up our ancestors of the Thompson family, there really were some 300 residents of the Amherst region who were part of defending the Union, and they're all represented on these important plaques. But it was historic that the 54th was the first African-American regiment. And even though the African-American community in Amherst was fairly small, about 100 individuals, thousands and thousands joined that regiment in defense of the Union in the hopes of a better life. And I think in the case of our ancestors, hoping that their descendants would have better lives. And I think we're a living testament that we do have better lives because of all of their sacrifices. I shared last year at the ceremony that I was particularly moved, now living in Houston, to be in a community where my great-great-great-grandfather and his son and brother all went as part of Juneteenth in 1865 and spent 5 months there informing former slaves that they were freed and also guarding Confederate soldiers. And our great-great-great uncle actually succumbed to diphtheria 5 days before he was to be discharged and returned to Amherst. So they, of course, made the ultimate sacrifice in support of hoping their descendants would have a better life. We're particularly excited about being part of the effort to create a historic walk in Amherst because Amherst is so rich in American history. To me, it's a microcosm of America and the journey of our country, from the early days of Europeans arriving here, the conflicts that happened over the many years, and of course, all the sacrifices that people made, all hoping for a better life. And so we really want to celebrate Amherst and the individuals who helped create the community that we all live in and we get to enjoy. I'm particularly proud of our ancestors who established Hazel Avenue and the Snell Street area and other parts of the community who are really dedicated. I have to recognize as well, when hearing about the work of, of course, the very famous Emily Dickinson, one of our ancestors, Charles Thompson, who was actually Christopher's son, was a well-known fiddler, and he used to play for parties at Emily Dickinson's house, and she's actually documented it in some of her diaries, that he was such a good fiddler, you had to get up and dance. So it's wonderful to know that we have music in our genes, of course, manifested in our grandfather, Gil Roberts, who is commemorated on the historic mural. So again, we're so excited about moving forward and working closely with the Historic Society, Amherst Historical Society, and specifically Anne Tweedy and all of her great research as we identify these important sites and see it as a way for people to come to Amherst and really embrace the important history and the role it's playing in the evolution of America. So thank you for having me here today. I'm so excited to be part of this conversation. And again, so humbled to be part of the celebration of Uncle Dudley.
Thank you so much, William. Thank you.
I wanted to also add, I urge people to take the tour for the plaques at the Bank Center because of the history they represent. This is a way to honor all the ancestors of Amherst who fought in the Civil War, including the 54th, the 55th, and the 5th Cavalry. It's amazing to see family members who come there when I'm showing them the tablets, especially children, and they see their names. And it could be their 3 or 4 or 5 times great grandfather. And it's just the look on their face is, you could see it all there. So I really urge people to really come in and then look at these plaques and look at the history. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And I guess, I don't know if anyone else from the family wanted to speak. Anika, did you have one more guest that wanted to come on, or?
We had a few people who had trouble with the link. I know, I believe Aniti had trouble with the link. And I'm not sure, there are probably a few others that weren't able to come on.
Okay. So maybe we can open it up to question and answer. If you guys are comfortable, that might be great to start a dialogue. That would be wonderful. Great. Deborah, what are the hours now for the Civil War tablet display? That's one question that I had.
The hours are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 10 a.m. to 3:30 downstairs at the Bank Center.
Excellent. And that display is ever changing in some ways. I mean, the tablets are there, but I think you're adding more to the gallery.
Yes, I research a lot, and I have historical pictures that also tell the story about the soldiers, the commanders, the 54th. I have all historical pictures that when I research and find new things, I change it up all the time. So the exhibit is very exciting.
That's excellent.
So I have a question. I'm just wondering, what are the main sources that you use to do your research? Is it family records or the Jones Library, or what are the sources that you use?
All of the above, really.
Yeah, so there's kind of an interesting genesis to the story, and I think it's very typical of American families where my late brother and I, some 15 years ago, we had oral history about the background of our family, and a lot of it didn't make sense. And so we started to actually do research, and he was a software engineer and designer, was very agile at doing digital research. And that's actually how we started building our family pedigree chart. And in fact, some of our ancestors were lost to us. We didn't have the information, it had not been passed down. And so we did everything from the traditional contacting city halls, getting copies of births and death certificates, marriage certificates. And then probably one of the greatest resources of information was once we had amassed enough information about our ancestors, my sister and I made 2 trips to the National Archive in Washington, D.C. And if anyone has ancestors who served in the military, it was remarkably easy to get their records. You can register and get a library card. It takes about 15 minutes. And then you watch an orientation video, and then they're converting still from microfiche to digital. But we actually went through microfiche and identified the file numbers. And this was only like a good maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And we actually pulled out on a piece of paper, like the old index cards, and we wrote down the reference numbers and submitted them to the reference librarian. And within 45 minutes, I don't know where they came from, they pulled the original files, and we went to the reference library, and we were actually holding the original records. And how we learned a lot about the lives of these veterans and our ancestors was that they were technically volunteers when they served in the 54th, 55th, and 5th Cavalries. And once they were honorably discharged after the war, they were eligible to receive a pension. But they had to prove that they were honorably discharged and were a sound character. And they made it actually quite hard for them, to our benefit, because they had to obtain depositions about their character with a lawyer. So you can imagine, and the 1870s, that you had to somehow get an attorney, you had to pay that fee, you had to get others in the community to vouch that you were a sound mind and character. But we have all these narratives about them that were part of their files. And that's how we learned about their lives, their achievements. And then they also did profiles about the people who wrote testimonials about them. And it's actually how I found the file of one of our ancestors who was part of the Fort Wagner assault. And it was his medical file from, and many of you know that they ended up sending many of the African-American soldiers ahead, and it was hand-to-hand combat. And it showed where he had been bayoneted in the battle. He survived that battle. But we actually saw it was holding his actual medical record from the field hospital where they were documenting his wounds. So I thought it was remarkable that we could get access to original documents and see them. They allow you to photograph them. They have a photocopier there to make copies. You're not allowed to bring in ink pens. You can bring in pencils. But again, it was absolutely remarkable. We could get access to these original documents. In some cases, you can be really lucky and find in a file the photograph of that person. Many soldiers knew because they knew a lot of people died in the Civil War. It's one of the bloodiest wars in history. And so they didn't know if they would know who the corpse belonged to. Some soldiers pinned their names inside of their clothing in case they were killed. But others had pictures taken and added to their files, their military files, so their bodies could be identified and returned to their families. We did not find any photographs in those files, but the ones that we looked at. But again, it was an incredibly rich source of information.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. It's the richness to the whole story just keeps developing.
Mhm. Again, I encourage anyone doing family research, particularly if you have ancestors who served in the military, to go to the National Archives in DC. It's a really fun experience to be in that building and right on Pennsylvania Avenue. And they have both volunteer genealogists and reference librarians who are experts, and they were incredibly helpful to us in identifying information about our family members. There's another resource that we tapped into, the New Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. They actually have a family research center, and they have full-time genealogists there as well. And as a free service, you can make an appointment and have a half-hour to an hour appointment with them, and they help direct you to resources and identify other digital resources, and they'll actually assist you with doing some of that research on your families.
And I see that we have 5 questions, I think, in the Q&A.
Okay, so I can read these off. We have one question. What will the foundation Ancestral Bridges seek to accomplish?
So Ancestral Bridges will seek to rather accomplish not only continuing to daylight the substance behind these tablets and as it pertains to the area, but also the rich culture and history of Amherst that is, and has been invisible for many parts. I mean, there's music and arts and culture that has, been lost between the lines here. I have one of my best friends even grew up near these areas and was unaware that these families lived there. And so, we've had, for instance, we had a discovery that, we found throughout our ancestors that I do wish our Aunt Edie was here to be able to share this story. But, there was a time where she was awarded a scholarship from the DAR, and we were found that was revoked, canceled upon learning that she was Black. And so one of the ways that we will do that is moving forward and ensuring that there are scholarships put in her name. We will assist people from anywhere from connecting youth with internships that will impact their lives, homeownership, anything that we can do, giving gifts in these people's names that are really intertwined in this fabric of Amherst, and really celebrating the freedom that they represented and the lives that they wanted us to live. I recently shared a story of my mother here while she was in the 4th grade at the Kellogg School. Her teacher asked her during a history class, she said, you're a little colored girl, what did it feel like to be a slave? And, we have to reimagine, what if that question had been, how did it feel that your 3 times great grandfather was a hero and was among the brave to put an end to slavery in America? Like, what message does that send? And so we here at this time, we have the ability to change that projection for the youth. What does that say about who they are? What does that say to other children who are next to them? So when those steps break down our racial barriers. And so we will do that and more of that in their honor.
That's excellent. And it's also what Dudley had done with Amherst A Better Chance too. It's sort of like the next stage, which is awesome. There is a question, what are the plans to display the tablets permanently?
Well, we are actually working we have a Civil War tablet committee that we had established. I want to say this was later 2019, or it's been a blur basically when I came back to Amherst. And we have just reconvened meetings. So we will definitely be updating folks in the near future. This is something that will, I'm sure, take a village of input, but it will happen, and we'll be happy to keep folks updated as we go along, and happy to connect with people who want to stay informed and may want to be of assistance.
Thank you. There's a question for Deborah. Deborah, could you say a little bit more about the 54th Regiment and Amherst?
The 54th, there are a few relatives that were in Amherst, but I believe that William could probably answer that question a little bit better than I could.
Yes, and in fact, I know watching today, we have Robert Rummer, who has been an incredible resource to us and our family and helping learn about our history. And in fact, he was one of the first people I contacted. And of course, he has now published several books about the history of African Americans and other important people from Amherst in the Civil War era. But we know that at the time of the Civil War, there were about 100 African Americans, most of them are his ancestors, living in the Amherst region. And again, it was decided to begin to allow African Americans to serve on behalf of the Union, but there was a lot of anxiety. There was a concern about would these African Americans be good soldiers? Would they be capable? And in fact, most of them had to practice with sticks. They would not actually give them arms until they went into battle. And so they were at a huge disadvantage, but proved that they were really valiant. They were committed to the Union and this cause. And actually, African Americans and slaves, both freed and enslaved, flocked to join the 54th. And then that caused the creation of other units across the country that enabled African Americans to organize and former slaves to be part of it. We have another branch of our family I'll share, the Robert side. So our ancestors Thompson are on the Robert side of the family, but up the maternal line, up the Bakeman line. And then on the Robert side of the family, we're actually descended from slaves from Eastern Shore, Maryland, who were slaves on the Wiley plantation and owned by the Lord family. And the Lord supported the Union and said to any of their male slaves, if you will join the cause of the Union, you have your freedom. And so our great-great-grandfather, Perry Roberts, was one of those. He was part of a group that are known as the Unionville 18. They were 18 men who fought for the Union and afterwards returned to Eastern Shore, Maryland. His son decided he wanted to have nothing to do with staying in Eastern Shore and left for Amherst. And that's actually how Perry Roberts came to live with several of his siblings in Amherst and built his own home on Hazel Avenue as one of the first houses. And so that's kind of part of the genesis of the family, how we ended up with many of our ancestors living on Hazel Avenue.
Anika, did you want to invite someone else to join Robert Romer?
Yeah, why don't you skip to the next question and then.
So we have a couple of, let's see, we have a couple of messages to you guys. Carly Tartikoff said that Gary and I are here and want you to know how proud we are to celebrate this with you today. Thank you for your contributions to us and to the town of Amherst.
And thank you to them. Both Gary and Carly Tartikoff are part of the Civil War Tablet Committee, along with Amilcar and Dimitra Shabazz, and Jennifer Moisten, Benjamin Breger, and David Zomak. They're all part of that committee. So thank you all.
And then there's just general well wishes and great thanks from a number of folks watching. Are there any other questions that folks
And
have?
if I can make a question, I just again want to say what a great experience it was for all the Juneteenth festivities last summer. In such a hard time, it was just so much fun to see people out and to have people learning about Juneteenth and to see the ceremonies and the reenactors. It was just great, and I really appreciate all the effort it took to put all that together. And I wondered if something is going to be planned for this coming summer, or if you have any news to share about that.
Well, we're planning a historic walking tour. And actually we're going to go walk it on Monday to make sure that it makes sense. But it's going to be fantastic and share lots of stories of these neighborhoods that I don't think people really realize how historic and valuable and interesting they are. And I think we're hoping to do that for one day, because Juneteenth is now a federal holiday. Everyone's going to have Monday off. So we're trying to time it so that one day could be historic tours. I think there's going to be Peter Brace Brigade, who was around last year, is coming back. And so we might have an opportunity to have them at the History Museum doing a camp out. But maybe Anika, you can talk to more of the broader sense. I think it's going to be like last year, but more parts involved and more folks involved.
Definitely more folks involved. And, this is forming into a weekend event, which would also include, as we know now, both the folks up at the Mill District and also the Drake. But again, this is in very premature stages, so we will keep everyone updated.
That's terrific.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Do any of our panelists have any more questions?
I just want to say that the comments in the chat are building up, and I hope you get to read all of them. They're all very, very appreciative. And I know you're trying to focus on the screen and and answering the questions, but you have a lot of admirers showing their appreciation in the comments. So if you click on the Q&A, you'll see them.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. I don't know if Cindy is with us to put Robert Rummer on. We could wait a little bit, or how is everyone feeling about that?
If Robert could join us, it would be fantastic, because he's such an incredible resource, and it's his love of Amherst, of course, and the documentation, and his most recent book about a young man who left Amherst College to fight for the side of the Union and was driven to help end slavery was his motivation. And it, of course, relates to the Snell family, and of course, Snell House and Snell Street. And it's a wonderful book, and I encourage you all to obtain copies of it. But I know Robert has also written a book about the history of African-American families in the western part of the state. And so I'm sorry he's not able to usually he makes sure that he keeps me correct in the things that I say in research, because he, of course, has become quite the historian himself.
Hi, Robert, welcome.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here. Good to see William. Other members of what I regard as the Harris branch of my family.
Yes, great to see you, Bob.
Love it. So I think there were some questions before that we were hoping that you could share some of your knowledge on the connections of the family in your research. William, did you have a specific question that you wanted to ask Bob?
Yes, I was going to ask Bob if you could share a little more about kind of the origins and growth of the 54th Regiment, and ultimately then the 55th and 5th Cavalry. I think we know the 54th was the first of the African-American, formally sanctioned African-American units. I mean, Blacks and other African-Americans were joining the war effort for the Union informally. But this was, I think, the first recognized African-American unit.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that, but it was certainly one of the very first. And as you know, William, you had ancestors in the Massachusetts 54. Sometimes people thinking about Black soldiers in the Civil War are surprised to learn that it wasn't only the 54th. There were, I think I said this at the Juneteenth ceremony, a number that I wish every high school student would learn: 200,000 Black men fought for the Union. And so it's a lot bigger than the 54th. There was something like 10 Amherst men in the 54th, and then a dozen in the Mass 5th Cavalry, which was formed later. There was one of my, I think of as my Thompson ancestors. Of course, he's William's ancestor officially, but there was one of the many Thompsons from Amherst who fought in the Union who was in the 54th, and 4 more Thompsons. Christopher's son, Charles, John, and one more whose name escapes me, but 5 Thompsons altogether. And I think many of you know that I took advantage of being on the Historical Commission a few years ago to persuade the town, as an official town act, to erect a belated gravestone for Christopher in West Cemetery. We know he died there, but he was probably too broke for his family to afford a stone at the time he died. And we made a gravestone that was a gravestone he would have had if he had gotten one back in 1898 when he died. And we listed on the backside all the Thompsons who fought for the Union. And we meant it to be implicitly a recognition of the many, many Amherst men who fought for the Union. That's how, well, it was before that I got to meet the Harris family. Steve Connor, the veterans agent, and I organized the ceremony in 2011 for the Black Civil War soldiers from the town. I expect quite a few of you were at that ceremony, and that's where I first met William and Edie, and Lori wasn't there, but Dan was there.
Yeah, Dan was there, yes.
So perhaps it's unseemly of me to be plugging my book, but I took advantage of publishing a book which had nothing to do directly with the Amherst 54th or the 5th Cavalry, but it's a short book. It's 50 pages of text and then 100 pages of notes and appendices, which maybe I don't know, some of my physics friends have always referred to me as footnote happy, but I put in as an appendix my best estimate of who the 22 Black soldiers total from Amherst were, and how I came to that conclusion. And I also a list of the 23 white Amherst College students who, like the main subject of my new book, became officers in Black regiments, which is a basically unknown sidelight to Amherst College history. I also included some appendices, like I listed the Amherst College students that I know of, who I could find, who became soldiers for the Confederates. Anyhow, it's been great fun and interesting during the 21 years since I officially retired from being a physicist, although I've kept at some of that, learning about new things this way and meeting a lot of people I wouldn't otherwise met. So I really appreciate being part of the, well, they call it the Amherst history community, even though all I do for the Historical Society is my wife and I give money, and I also have given quite a few talks there, history bites and whatnot. Anyhow, thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
So I think we're now at 3:15. I think we're just supposed to go till 3. Are there any other questions, or does anyone want to announce anything? Or
I mean, I just hope that the Historical Society Board will keep learning about the activities that you're planning, and please keep in close touch with us and let us know if there are ways that we can get your message out and get information out. This is really impressive what your family has done and what you've learned, and I hope we can promote it in multiple ways.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do want to say one final thought, if I may, and I think it is so important to understand the history and understand how decisions were made. But I think it's also important to acknowledge we do live in contemporary times, and we need to take away those lessons. And our aspiration in all of this and this understanding is that our family and many other families care deeply for the community. And so all these efforts are to create a more harmonious community and one that continues to improve society and make it a better place. And so it's not to pass judgment about people in the context of their time, as much to understand the dynamics of what happened and what are those residual elements that might be affecting how we perceive others and how we conduct ourselves today. So I think, awareness and knowledge is really important, a powerful way of helping us formulate how we want to conduct ourselves now and into the future. So that really is a lot of what drives me, is taking away those lessons and understanding that we can make decisions today that are really going to benefit the entire community and make it an even better place than it is currently.
well said.
Excellent
Thank
words.
you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you.